All right, today we're cracking open a really fascinating case file. This is case file 8, the story of Grady J. We're going to be doing a kind of clinical review, looking at his testimony for Dr. Tennillious. And what we're really going to hone in on is this deep psychological link between some pretty severe trauma he experienced and a series of what he describes as, well, paranormal events.
And really, the best place to start is with a question from Grady himself. It's a pretty haunting one, and it really sets the stage for everything we're about to explore.
Okay, so let's get into the official details. We're going to start with the presenting problem straight from Dr. Eliza Tennillious' case notes.
So here it is in a nutshell. We have a young man, Grady J., who is convinced, absolutely convinced, that the entity of death is personally stalking him, and he believes death is causing all these accidental mishaps in his life. So the big question for us is, where in the world did a belief like that come from? That's what we need to figure out.
And according to Grady, it all started at his father's deathbed. This is where we find two really crucial, foundational traumatic events.
So the first event, it's a story. But think about the setting here. His father is terminally ill, and he's telling this story through a cloud of marijuana smoke. For a kid, that's an incredibly powerful, confusing scene, right? It's just primed to blur the lines between what's real and what's not. And his father, Martin, pulls him in close to tell him this story.
And all throughout this story, you have this sound, a constant, heavy cough. It's this grim soundtrack to the whole thing, a constant reminder that behind this spooky ghost story, there's a very real death happening right there in the room.
So what was the story about? Well, his dad tells him about this time when he was young. Him and his buddies broke into this old house on Cherry Tree Hill, and it was super weird. On the outside, totally run down, rotting wood, you know the drill. But inside, it was perfect, pristine, like no one had ever left. There was this creepy, unnatural silence, and they got the feeling they were being watched. So being kids, they grabbed some stuff, a couple of dolls, some journals, a gold bracelet, and that's when the house fought back.
And this is the climax of the story. It's just total chaos. His dad says, boom, the house just shook. And the next thing they knew, they were outside. Imagine being a little kid at your father's deathbed, hearing that. It just plants this huge seed in your mind, right? The wall between what's real and what's supernatural just starts to crumble.
And then, just like that, the story was over, and the coughing stopped. That brings us to the second, even more direct trauma, which happened in the moments right after his father passed away.
Right then, Grady says he sees something. He describes this vivid, hallucination, a shape darker than the shaded room. It takes form, gets a head, shoulders, and then these huge black wings. And he says flat out, "I seen death take my father." Now, for Grady, this is not a metaphor. He believes he saw a real physical being, and crucially, he believes that being saw him. And that's the moment it all clicks into place for him. Death knows who I am.
So now Grady has this framework, this new belief system. There is a supernatural entity, death, and it's aware of him. And from that point on, his life becomes this absolutely shocking series of near-fatal accidents. And he now has a way to explain every single one of them. Just look at this timeline. It's relentless. It maps out the constant physical trauma Grady went through, starting from when he was just a little kid. At 5 or 6, he falls out of a moving car. Age 7, he gets hit in the head with a rock. At 8, his sister accidentally crushes his chest. Age 10, a dog mauls him. And by 12, someone's pointing a gun at his head. I mean, you look at this, and it's clear. This isn't just a string of bad luck. This is a childhood that was basically defined by disaster.
And if you look at what happened after these injuries, you see this really disturbing pattern. It points to some serious neglect. Step 1, he suffers a major injury. Step 2, he doesn't go to a hospital, he gets taken to good old Dr. Lee. Step 3, he gets patched up, stitches, penicillin. And then step 4, he's sent right back into the exact same dangerous environment. So the whole cycle is just waiting to happen all over again.
Okay, so let's zoom in on a couple of these accidents, because this is where we can really see that connection between the physical event, what actually happened, and what was going on inside Grady's head. So first, this incident on a flying fox. His sister slips, falls, and her weight crushes his chest. But listen to how Grady remembers it. It's not just, "I couldn't breathe."
He says the black abyss rolled over, he feels a cold rush tingle, and then he sees colorful gases similar to cosmic stardust. He's not just describing pain, he's describing a total detachment from his body, from reality. And clinically, that's a classic sign of dissociation. His mind is checking out to survive the trauma.
All right, let's take another example. Another really dangerous fall. He's on top of a new treehouse, showing off, and the roof, which is just thin tin, it just gives way.
And again, look at how his mind processes this. It's not just a lucky break. He says, "Before my body made the horizontal impact, I felt a tight pull around my waist, like a hand had reached out and grabbed me." Now, in reality, his underwear caught on a branch, but in his perception, it was a hand, a deliberate, external force intervening. That's a huge difference.
And it's so important to understand these weren't just one-off events. His entire environment was just filled with chaos and danger. We're talking about being locked in a car that's 60 degrees Celsius inside as a punishment, getting knocked out cold by a rock thrown at his head, being put into a yard with a dangerous dog that then mauls him. Every single one of these moments just drills in the idea that the world is a completely unsafe and unpredictable place.
So this brings us to the big clinical question, right? How do we make sense of this? You have this very real, very repeated trauma on one hand, and these perceived supernatural encounters on the other. What's the connection? What purpose does this whole death is stalking me story actually serve for him psychologically?
And the key concept here, clinically, is something called dissociation. Basically, it's a way the mind protects itself. When what's happening to you is just too awful, too terrifying to deal with, your mind hits an eject button. It creates this disconnect, this escape hatch, so you don't get totally shattered by the experience.
So if we lay it out, it becomes pretty clear. On one side, you have Grady's perception. Death talks to me. The clinical interpretation, he's having dissociative episodes during trauma. He says a hand grabbed me. Clinically, that's his mind creating a story to help him cope. But here's the really brilliant and tragic part. The big idea? Death is stalking me. That's what ties it all together. It creates a coherent story out of incoherent, random violence. It takes all this meaningless, terrifying stuff happening to him and turns it into a cosmic battle. It gives order to the chaos.
And all of this seems to build to this one absolutely terrifying moment when he's 12. An acquaintance of his mom's comes over, and Grady, being a kid, asks if the guy's handgun is real. And the man's response is to whip the gun right to the center of Grady's forehead and pull the trigger. Now, it turned out to be a compressed air gun, but for that 1 second, Grady thought he was dead. In that moment, the line between one of these mishaps and the real thing just vanished.
So you take this whole history, the trauma, the neglect, the dissociation, the stories, it all leads us right back to where we started. It leads us back to Grady's own conclusion, to the one question he asks that completely reframes his entire existence. And what we're left with is this. Just the profound power of trauma. It doesn't just shape a life, it can completely redefine what reality even is. Because if your entire childhood is just one near-death experience after another, then maybe, just maybe, believing you're already dead and living in the afterlife isn't a delusion at all. Maybe it's the only logical story your mind can possibly build to survive something that should have been unsurvivable.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking a really incredibly intense set of clinical notes today. They're known as Case File 8.
Yeah, documented by Dr. Eliza Tennillious. She's a psychologist who specializes in working with children and adolescents, which is key here.
Right? And our subject today is a young man named Grady, though he's sometimes referred to as Jet in his youth. And he came to a psychologist with this truly chilling, unshakable belief.
He is absolutely convinced that death itself, like the literal Grim Reaper, is stalking him.
Yes, exactly. He believes death is constantly putting him in these bizarre, near-death scenarios just to, taunt him and communicate with him.
It's a heavy file.
It is. So our mission for you, the listener, especially if you're a high school student stepping into the fascinating world of psychology, is to use Grady's childhood stories as this sort of masterclass in human resilience.
Absolutely. We're going to examine how the human brain, particularly a young developing brain, processes severe trauma.
And how it reshapes perception. Right. Like literally creating supernatural narratives to cope with an objectively dangerous reality.
Yeah, because his reality was objectively terrifying.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the sheer cinematic nature of Grady's experiences is just mind-blowing. When you read the file, It honestly feels like a dark fantasy novel.
It really does. But the awe here comes from realizing this is a real clinical case. The human mind built this elaborate supernatural stalker totally from scratch.
Yeah, from the ground up. And to understand why his brain felt the need to construct a monster, we have to start at the genesis of this narrative.
Right, the hospital room.
Exactly, the hospital room where young Grady watched his father, Martin, pass away. But to get the full psychological picture, we have to look at the moments immediately leading up to that trauma.
What's fascinating here is that the psychological architecture of Grady's delusion was actively being laid down by his father right before he passed. We aren't ghost hunting today, we are exploring the architecture of a traumatized mind.
I love that phrasing.
Thanks. And that architecture was built on a very specific story his dad told him.
A deeply unsettling story, I might add. The clinical notes describe Martin on his deathbed. He's frail, he's in immense pain, and he's heavily self-medicating.
Yeah, he's literally coughing through hits of marijuana while telling young Grady this story.
Right, a story from his own youth about a place called Cherry Tree Hill in Bathurst. Martin claims he and his friends broke into an abandoned, decrepit house that felt entirely frozen in time.
And the sensory details Martin imparts to his son are so crucial here.
Oh, totally.
He describes these red carpets that looked freshly vacuumed, a dining table fully set for dinner, and antique furniture in pristine condition.
Even though the house is abandoned in the middle of a dead, overgrown forest.
Exactly. For a child listening to their dying father, these vivid details bridge the gap between reality and the supernatural.
And like any classic horror setup, the kids in Martin's story start stealing things. Journals, a gold bracelet, and Martin takes 2 dolls from a pink child's bedroom.
The dolls are the catalyst.
Yeah. The moment he removes those dolls, Martin claims the entire house shakes with these massive, cannon-like booms. The next thing they know, they're mysteriously teleported outside into the shrubs.
And Martin went to his grave absolutely believing those dolls cursed him.
It's wild. You have a dying father passing down a literal, terrifying ghost story to his son mere moments before his own death.
Which brings us to the actual death scene, the moment Grady's perception of reality completely fractures.
Right.
When Martin passes away, Grady doesn't just feel sad, he experiences a profound sensory distortion.
He describes the hospital monitors flatlining, but then the colors in the room begin to dissolve into television static.
Yeah. He says the light is seemingly absorbed from the air, and then he sees a 7-foot-tall winged shadow emerge from the wall to take a shimmering light, his father's soul, from the bed.
It's just terrifying. Grady is completely paralyzed during this, but he manages to force out a single scream. He just yells, "No."
And in his mind, that one word changes the fabric of the universe.
Yes. He believes the entity stopped, looked back, and became curious about this little kid who somehow broke the boundaries of reality.
It's such a specific detail.
It is, and I want to look at the mechanics of this. Instead of thinking of his brain like a computer crashing, it sounds almost like a psychological autoimmune response.
Oh, that's an interesting way to put it.
Like the brain's defense mechanism is so aggressive that it attacks its own connection to reality just to survive the emotional pain.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize dissociation. For a high school student learning this concept, we have to look at the actual neurology of a developing brain.
Right, like the different parts of the brain doing different jobs.
Exactly. You have the amygdala, which is essentially the brain's fire alarm. It processes fear and threat.
Okay.
Then you have the prefrontal cortex, which handles logic, reasoning, and processing complex emotions. When a child witnesses something as profoundly devastating as a parent's death, the amygdala sounds an alarm so loud that it completely overwhelms the prefrontal cortex.
So the logical part just shuts off.
Completely shuts down. The brain is flooded with stress hormones like cortisol, and it simply disconnects from the unbearable sensory input of the room.
Wow.
The static and the blacking out that Grady describes, that is textbook visual and sensory dissociation. His brain is literally editing his reality in real time to protect his psyche from a catastrophic emotional collapse.
But I have to push back here, or at least challenge the timeline a bit.
Okay, go for it.
Was Martin's haunting Bathurst story the specific catalyst that primed Grady's imagination to see a supernatural entity moments later? Like if his dad hadn't told him a ghost story about curses and teleportation, would Grady's dissociative state have manifested as a monster? Or would it have just been a blank void?
That's a great question. The brain desperately needs raw materials to build a dissociative shield.
Wow, okay.
Grady is terrified, he is deeply grieving, and his father just planted the seed of curses, supernatural forces, and inescapable doom right into his subconscious.
So he just used what was lying around in his head.
Precisely. When the trauma peaks, Grady's brain personifies that trauma using the materials it was just given. By giving death a face, massive black wings, and a specific motive, this whole idea of curiosity, Grady takes a random, chaotic, devastating tragedy and gives it rules.
He give it a narrative structure.
Right. He isn't just a helpless kid watching his dad die of a medical failing. He is the boy who made death pause.
Wow. He casts himself as the main character in a cosmic play, rather than a helpless victim of biology.
And that transition of identity is crucial for his survival.
It really is. Now that we understand the psychological origin of the stalker, we have to look at the objective reality of daily life.
Because it wasn't just his dad passing away.
Exactly. The surviving adults in his life were fundamentally failing him in terrifying, life-threatening ways.
The clinical notes reveal an environment completely devoid of safety. We really have to shift from the psychological origin of his delusion to the profound objective dangers he had to survive on a regular basis.
Let's examine the environment with his mother, who is referred to in the file as V. She is struggling with a severe methamphetamine addiction.
The home is described as incredibly chaotic and unsecured.
Right. One afternoon, Grady is 12 years old, sitting at the kitchen table eating Cocoa Pops and watching cartoons. Just a normal kid stuff.
Yeah.
And this desperate man walks straight into their house, asks where V is, and then walks right up to a 12-year-old Grady, presses a silver handgun to the center of his forehead, and pulls the trigger.
It's unimaginable. Now, it turned out to be a compressed air gun.
Right, but still.
Exactly, but in that split second, the biological reality of Grady's nervous system is that he was shot and killed. He fully believed he had been murdered.
He even notes in the file that he wondered if everything happening afterward might be the afterlife.
Because the shock to the system is that severe.
Then there's his uncle. They go for a drive. There are no seatbelts in the back of the car. The car door is actually left wide open.
Which is just wildly negligent.
The uncle violently accelerates around a corner, and Grady falls face first out of the moving vehicle onto black, tarred gravel. He is scraped to the bone.
And instead of rushing this severely injured child to an emergency room where authorities might ask questions, his uncle throws him back into the car and bypasses the hospital entirely.
Right. He takes him to a local private doctor named Dr. Lee.
Yeah.
And later, there's the slime time incident where Grady gets a massive shard of glass sliced through his wrist clean to the bone. And once again, he avoids the hospital and runs to get stitched up by Dr. Lee.
This brings us to a foundational psychological concept that every student needs to grasp. It's called locus of control.
Okay, break that down for us.
It refers to how much control a person feels they have over the events in their life. You can have an internal locus of control, meaning you believe your actions dictate your outcomes, or an external locus of control where you feel you are at the mercy of outside forces. For the psych students listening, think about how this applies to your daily life. If you fail a math test, an internal locus makes you think, well, I didn't study enough. An external locus makes you think, the teacher hates me and the test was rigged.
Now, scale that up to life or death survival.
Exactly. Imagine being a child surviving constant lethal situations and realizing that your external locus of control rests entirely in the hands of adults who are actively endangering you.
A drug-addicted mother.
Yeah.
A wildly careless uncle.
Accepting that the people meant to protect you are the source of your danger is a psychologically annihilating thought. It leads to profound despair.
You just can't live with that terror every single day and remain functional.
No, you can't. So Grady's brain engineers this brilliant adaptive solution. He rationalizes these events through his established delusion.
The death stalker.
Right. He decides that death is using him in a limbo state to communicate. It is psychologically easier for Grady to believe that a cosmic Grim Reaper is testing him, playing a grand game with him, than to accept the terrifying truth that he is a profoundly neglected child.
So the delusion of the stalker death actually protects his mind from the reality of his human neglect.
Yes. He creates a supernatural external locus of control to shield himself from the human external locus of control.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I want to talk about this recurring character, Dr. Lee.
Ah, yes, Dr. Lee.
Grady's notes literally say, quote, "Thank you, Dr. Lee, for keeping me together. I'd think I'd look like a rag doll if it was any other doctor."
It's a very telling statement.
Right, because Dr. Lee is always there. He stitches him up, gives him penicillin, fixes the split forehead. But wait, I'm struggling to understand something here.
What's that?
How does a kid get his forehead split open or a shard of glass sliced clean to the bone and the doctor never calls child services? From a psychological standpoint, doesn't that lack of intervention make the doctor a villain in Grady's mind?
To a healthy mind, yes. The doctor's failure to report the abuse would definitely be seen as a betrayal. But to a mind operating under a massive dissociative shield, Dr. Lee serves a very specific, twisted function. He becomes a mechanic in Death's game. Grady faces a lethal threat, survives it, gets stitched up quickly by Dr. Lee, and goes right back to his chaotic normal.
Oh, wow.
This creates a dangerous reinforcement loop. In Grady's mind, his survival proves his supernatural theory. Death brings him to the edge, but because he's special and Death is just curious, he is allowed to live.
And Dr. Lee patching him up is just the mechanism of that survival.
Exactly. The complete lack of systemic intervention, no hospital asking questions, no police, no child services. It allows Grady's private horror movie to play on a loop without any objective adult reality puncturing his delusion.
The resilience of the human brain here is staggering, but it's also incredibly dark. Yeah. He is literally outsourcing his survival to this entity, and that illusion of invincibility bleeds directly into our next section. We have to look at how peer pressure and sibling dynamics further fueled his exposure to danger.
Because when adults fail to provide a safe structure, traumatized children often turn to their peer.
They create their own micro-societies.
And because their baseline for safety is completely warped, the rules of survival in these micro-societies become highly skewed.
Grady's micro-society was absolutely brutal. Take the hot car incident. Grady and his sister are locked in a car in the Australian summer heat. We are talking 60 degrees Celsius.
Which is lethal.
Completely. And this is a punishment orchestrated by his mother. They're literally dying of heat stroke. As the panic sets in, sibling rage takes over.
They turn on each other.
Yeah, they get into a massive fist fight inside this boiling car, and Grady punches his sister so hard he knocks her tooth out. But she uses that bloody tooth, holding it up to the window, to finally get the adult's attention and save them from cooking to death.
And she later thanked him for knocking her tooth out.
That is just a profound example of how their baseline for normal is completely distorted. Violence became a literal, necessary tool for survival.
When you go through an intensely life-threatening experience with someone, especially a sibling, it can create what we call trauma bonding. The shared terror and the desperate fight for survival forge a connection that is built on extreme stress rather than healthy affection.
Does his shifting sense of reality make him view his peers and siblings almost as collateral damage? Or even co-stars in his own personal horror movie? I mean, they fought tooth and nail in that car just to live.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of adolescent psychology, traumatized teenagers frequently engage in extreme risk-taking. But Grady's risk-taking has a specific delusional flavor.
Because of the stalker.
Right. Because he thinks death decides when he dies, he outsources his own safety entirely. He acts invincible. He believes the choice of whether he lives or dies is completely out of his hands, so he just stops trying to protect himself.
Which explains the unbelievable risks he takes and how he reacts when things go wrong.
The playground incident is a perfect example.
Yes, let's look at the newly opened Enfield Play Park. He and his sister go on a 30-meter flying fox. She rides on top of him, loses her grip, falls, and her entire weight crushes his chest.
He suffocates, blacks out, and hallucinates cosmic stardust before waking up to blinding light.
And then there is the BMX track, where he is in the middle of a rock fight with other kids. He watches a massive rock falling toward him. In his notes, he describes it like a meteor from outer space.
And what does he do?
He doesn't duck. He just stares at it in awe until it splits his forehead open, folding his body in half backwards onto the dirt. I have to ask, is this suicidal ideation? Does he want the rock to hit him?
It is less about wanting to be hit and more about a severe biological shutdown known as the freeze response.
Like fight or flight.
Well, we often hear about fight or flight, but the full physiological response to trauma is fight, flight, or freeze. When an animal or a human is faced with an overwhelming predator and neither fighting nor running is an option, the nervous system drops into a dorsal vagal state.
So the body literally immobilizes.
Yes. Throughout his life, Grady couldn't fight his mother's addiction, and he couldn't flee his uncle's neglect. His nervous system is conditioned to freeze. When he sees that rock falling, his brain misinterprets it as an inescapable predator, as death making a move. He is a passive observer in his own life, waiting for the stalker to strike.
That neurological explanation makes so much sense. It's not a philosophical choice to stare at the rock. His nervous system is literally shutting down.
Yeah.
And this profound disconnect impacts every facet of his developing life, especially his social and romantic interactions. Let's talk about the treehouse.
Oh, the treehouse incident.
Grady and his dad had built this massive 2-story treehouse with a tin roof. As a teenager, he invites a girl named Wendy up there. She initiates a deeply overwhelming, very direct sexual encounter.
And Grady, who's clearly operating on a hair-trigger nervous system, completely panics.
He flees. He scurries up the tree trunk onto the thin tin roof. To cover his panic and his fear of intimacy, he starts flexing his muscles, shouting to the street below that he is the king of the castle.
He is using physical bravado to mask a deep, underlying fear of emotional vulnerability. For someone whose entire life has been defined by physical survival and fending off a supernatural stalker, the quiet, interpersonal vulnerability required for intimacy is entirely alien. It feels far more threatening than standing on a flimsy tin roof.
And the physical danger immediately catches up to him. The tin roof breaks. He falls, making eye contact with the horrified Wendy as he plummets.
It's almost surreal.
In an almost cartoonish twist of fate, his underwear catches on a thick tree branch, acting like a bungee cord. It stops him mere inches from being impaled on a sharply chewed dog bone sitting on the ground below.
The danger was incredibly lethal, but the survival mechanism was absurd.
Totally absurd.
But to Grady's deeply ingrained psychological shield, this isn't a lesson in roof safety or a sign that he needs to work on emotional regulation.
No, of course not.
It is simply another deliberate, elaborate trap set by his stalker, Death, that he miraculously survived. His delusion absorbs the event and grows stronger.
We see this exact same dynamic play out with the group of kids he calls the rat bag.
Yeah, the spray paint cans.
Right. He hangs out at a brick house with these ruleless kids whose parents are totally absent. They're throwing full spray paint cans into a fire pit just to watch them explode.
Which is insanely dangerous.
When one explodes, a metal ball bearing shoots past Grady like a bullet, shattering a nearby window. Now, Grady isn't completely devoid of logic. He knows this is insane. He actually tries to run away.
But then the hat.
Yes. One of the ratbag kids steals his favorite trucker hat, which was a gift from his famous fisherman uncle, and throws it into the neighbor's yard.
The hat represents a rare piece of positive identity and connection to an adult figure. For a teenager stripped of so much agency, the need to reclaim that identity suddenly overrides his basic safety instincts.
He climbs the fence to get the hat, and the neighbor's dog immediately attacks him. As another explosion goes off in the fire pit, the dog bites down on his leg, shaking it violently. He barely escapes, requiring 17 stitches.
It's just relentless.
The sheer volume of trauma this kid endures is staggering. Even later, at a government-funded camp for stray teens, he jumps backward off a railing, relying on a rope, and his head whips mere inches from the concrete floor.
Every single one of these events, the compressed air gun falling from the car, the glass in his wrist, the baking hot car, the flying fox, the treehouse, the dog mauling.
All of it.
These are the objective realities of a highly neglected, unsupervised, and traumatized adolescence.
But to Grady, they are the breadcrumbs of a supernatural stalker. They are proof that death is obsessed with him.
This raises an important question. How do we, as observers or as students of psychology, view individuals with seemingly bizarre, even delusional beliefs?
That's the core of it, really.
When you look at Grady's clinical file, the easiest, most dismissive thing to do is label him as crazy. But delving into the psychology of trauma teaches us the exact opposite.
Because his mind isn't broken.
Exactly. It is highly remarkably adaptive. The stalker death is a brilliant psychological shield. It was constructed by a vulnerable child who needed a way to endure an incredibly dangerous, neglect-filled youth.
Without that supernatural shield, the reality of his mother's severe addiction, his father's terrifying death, and the constant, lethal physical danger would have been psychologically unsurvivable.
His mind built a demon because at least demons have motives and rules. Random, senseless human neglect doesn't.
Wow. So, what does this all mean for you, listening to this deep dive? It means that understanding the mechanics of psychology fundamentally changes how we see the world and the people in it.
It really does foster empathy.
It helps us realize that behind bizarre, seemingly paranormal beliefs, or even just erratic behavior, there is almost always a very real, very vulnerable human being simply trying to make sense of a world that feels violently out of control.
Grady wasn't haunted by a literal entity with black wings. He was haunted by a profound lack of safety.
Which leaves us with something to really think about. Grady was a kid in extreme, life-threatening circumstances, and his developing mind had the immense power to construct an elaborate supernatural stalker just to protect him from the harsh reality of parental neglect.
A powerful defense mechanism.
But human brains all run on the same basic biological hardware. You have the same amygdala and prefrontal cortex. So what smaller, invisible narratives do we construct in our own daily lives?
That's a great point.
What stories do you tell yourself to avoid facing uncomfortable truths about your own relationships, your own academic or career failures, or your own fears? If you're sitting in a room right now and the reality of your life feels just a little too harsh to handle, well, what shadows is your mind quietly painting on the walls to protect you?